Good evening. Thank you for making the effort in coming to Kuch Khaas. My name is Nilofer Afridi Qazi. I will be moderating the series on Islam at Kuch Khaas as and when we organize them. Today we have Ambassador Iftikhar Murshed, Uncle Ifti with us. He is the publisher of the quarterly called Criterion. It is also recently up on the web, www.criterion_quarterly.com. The publications that Uncle Ifti has in the news vis-a-vis the topic that under discussion today, which is the myths and truths of the Hudood law in Pakistan, are also available on Kuch Khaas's website. So it would be useful if you find the discussion interesting that you go back and make reference to those publications, because then there's a lot more information based on the discussion, and today is a discussion. So with that, I will pass it on to Uncle Ifti. Just a little bit about the format. Usually we give the speaker, if it is a single speaker, about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
I'll tell you of a terrible thing that happened. A woman was walking in a mountainous area, hooded. She was dragged, thrown down, and 4 bearded men started hurling rocks at her, crushed her to death, and kept on hurling these stones and rocks at her. This was captured by Al-An television of Dubai, and a clip was shown on Pakistan television. It happened on the 28th of September 2010. It happened in this country. Yes, this is what happened to this woman, because she was alleged to have committed adultery. All I can say is this, that the priests have taken heaven from us. Successive governments have snatched the earth too. And I say this with reference to the Hudood Laws. The Hudood Laws are a travesty of justice. As Edmund Burke says, that bad laws are the worst form of tyranny, and so it is with the Hudood Ordinances. What is depressing, what is frightfully morbid, is that these laws continue to be in our statute books. And in this sense, I would like to congratulate Kuch Khaas, and if you don't mind me calling you, Nino, who sort of arranged this little meeting of ours. The idea is to have a brainstorming and to get your ideas and your views on how this insidious law can be rescinded. Before the introduction of the Hudood laws, we had the Anglo-Saxon laws, which included the Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Evidence Act, and with the promulgation of the Hudood Ordinances in 1979 and implemented the following year, these laws were retained, but certain changes were made on the ground that these were Islamic. Take it from me, I've done some studies on this. It is anything but Islamic. The Hudood laws deal with 5 sets of laws. One is called zina, And here is under the zina laws, adultery as well as fornication is included. The second of the laws is on qazaf, which is a fanciful term, meaning nothing more than punishment that is to be meted out to anyone who cannot punish the crime of zina. The third is a prohibition order, which gives 80 lashes with the whip, which is again not prescribed by the Quran, is a complete deviation from the Quran. The fourth is the offense against property, which again we find deviations from the Quran. The fifth is an amendment to the Code of Criminal Procedure. I shall pitch my tent for most of this discussion on the first of the Hudood laws, and that relates to zina. Under these laws, the primary victims have been women. These laws are a complete distortion of Islam. Have no doubt about that. If anyone were to ask me to define Islam, I would use just one word, and that is the Quran. The Quran is Islam. Anything that the Quran does not prescribe in the form of law is not Islam. Let us come to what the Hudood Ordinance on Zina has to say. First and foremost, it says that a married Muslim adult committing zina, adultery, is to be stoned to death. The punishment for an unmarried adult Muslim or a non-Muslim is 100 lashes with the whip. Now, this is utter nonsense as far as the Quran is concerned. What does the Quran say? This is available, the laws are available in Surah Nur, verse 2, which simply says that for the adulterer and the adulteress, the punishment is 100 lashes. Nowhere does the Quran prescribe stoning to death. Neither is any distinction made between married Muslims and unmarried Muslims. In short, there is no difference whatsoever between what the West like to say adultery and fornication. They're one and the same according to Islamic jurisprudence. I would just like to flag one idea with you, and that idea is, if the Quran really did prescribe stoning to death for adultery, can I just ask you one question? Would in another of the verse of the Quran, the ordinance is this: for a person in bondage, the punishment for adultery is half, not half, as for married Muslims. So will someone tell me what the half of stoning to death is? Second, verse 3 of Surah Nur says that the married, that an adulterer will couple only with an adulteress. Now, how on earth can you couple with someone if you're stoned to death? So, This proves conclusively that there is no stoning to death in Islam. Question: why are these still in your statute books? Why? What are we doing about it? Has any action been taken to rescind these fraudulent laws? Then we come to another crime in the name of the Hudood Laws, and that is the requirement of 4 witnesses. Fine, the Quran does prescribe 4 witnesses, but what is the spirit of Islamic law? The spirit of Islamic law is to promote justice, because all laws are based on the rights of men, and this is the Quran speaking, not me. Now, supposing a woman is raped and she is unable to produce 4 witnesses, what the Hudood law does, it condemns the woman for zina and punishes her. Now, this is another distortion of Islamic law, and I'll tell you how. The preamble of the zina ordinance under the Hudood ordinances reads that this law on zina is meant to bring our laws in conformity with the Quran and the Sunnah. And at the same time, it includes rape in this category, or zina bil jabr. Again, this is a deviation from Islam. Rape is not is a crime of violence, and the law in the Quran relates to consensual sexual intercourse, either between married or unmarried adults. Rape is a completely different category, and it falls in the category of what is known as hiraba. And this is confirmed by the fiqh as-sunnah, which brings together all the laws of Islam, where rape is defined, amongst other things, it's a crime of violence punishable under hiraba. The government, this was the Hudood laws on zina were challenged in 1981 at the Federal Shariat Court. The court consists, it was established in 1980, and it consists of 8 judges, 3 of them from the ulama, the others are serving judges. It's an appellate court. That means the 3 ulamas have no legal experience. So when this was challenged in 1981, what did the learned judges say? 3 of them said that this punishment is un-Islamic, the punishment of stoning. One of them said that it is punishable under ta'zir, and that's another fraud. A third one said that this is punishable under had. Now, the gentleman who said it is punishable under had, his name is Justice Karamatullah Durrani, who didn't have the good sense. He justified what he said by referring to this ayat that I've just now quoted to you, and that is the one about married adulterers only coupling with married with adulterers. But he misquoted it. He said marrying. Now, there again, how can you, I mean, he defeated his own argument by resorting to this particular verse of the Quran. One of the other judges in that judgment was Justice Agha Ali Haider, who said that who was one of the three judges that said that this was an un-Islamic punishment. And he gave an interesting example, and of all people, he cited Maududi, where it said the punishment, this whipping punishment, it can be as mild as just taking a broom with 100 sticks and just striking a person once. The object is of not injuring a person, but to bring shame to a person. Now, some of the greatest authorities in Islam, for instance, Professor Sharif, second name is far too long for me to remember or pronounce correctly. I've got it written down here. I don't want to bring it out just now. It will spoil the flow. He is a professor in Columbia University, and he was nominated in 1999 for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, what he says is that the crime for adultery in Islam, the punishment for it has just one purpose, and that purpose is that the sexual act should not be performed in public. That's where it ends, because the evidentiary requirement is such that it is impossible to prove it. And what are the evidentiary requirements? I think we're all adults here, are we? Yes, we are. The evidentiary requirements are that there must be 4 first-hand witnesses who must have seen penetration. 1, 2, there must not be any infringement of the privacy of the couple. This is impossible to fulfill unless a person is a lunatic and decides to perform the act in public. Only then, and that's very unlikely. So these are some thoughts on the Zina Ordinance. I'm running out of time. So I have 5 or 10 minutes more, 5 minutes? Okay, so now I come to the prohibition order, and I wish Ayaz Amir was here. He'd bless me for it. There is no prohibition in Islam for the consumption of alcohol or intoxicants. There are 4 verses. Verse 1. In fact, 2 of them are in favor. Verse 1. In intoxicants and games of chance, there is some good and some bad, but the bad outweighs the good. Verse 2. Don't pray if you are drunk. Only start praying, only you can pray once you've sobered down, come down to Mother Earth from the 9th cloud. Verse 3, this is the work of Satan. Now, Satan needs definition. Satan is within you also in Quranic terminology. It is human nature. And all it says is, will you not refrain? And the most interesting is Surah Nahl, that's Surah 16, verse 67, which says that amongst the signs of God that we have sent you are the dates and the grapes from which you draw nourishment as well as intoxicants. Question to you, and let's have a discussion on that afterwards. Is there prohibition? No, not in the Quran. Is there punishment? Certainly not. No punishment is prescribed. So how on God's earth do the zina, not the zina, I beg your pardon, do the Hudood laws come up with the punishment of 80 lashes? Now this is absolutely ridiculous. You know what the law says, the Hudood law? That if two witnesses, for adultery by the way is the only crime, only offense where 4 witnesses are required, all others 2. Now this says if 2 witnesses see you knocking it back, 2 Muslim adults, you're in for it, 80 lashes. This is what the Hudood ordinances say. But nothing happens to you. No Hudood laws are applied. If you're totally slosh and you go in for a medical examination, the medical report says that you had a very high alcohol content. No punishment. This is the Hudood laws. I'll come now to the last element of the laws, and that's property, stealing, highway robbery. There again, the geniuses who drafted the Hudood laws, they relied on Surah Maida. I'm forgetting the exact verse, but I think it is verses 33 to 34, where they talk of, there's a verse there which says it really deals with war, it deals with insurrection, and it uses 4 passive verbs, and all these 4 passive verbs are in the present tense. This is the Quran. And what does this mean in terms of law? In terms of law, let me first go to the formulation in the Quran. Those who create sedition, those who do all this, are being crucified in great numbers, are being banished from the face of the earth. So it is not a law, it is merely a statement. The geniuses who drafted the Hudood law on this subject say that it is an injunction. It is not an injunction. And the punishment that is prescribed is, under the Hudood laws, is for non-violent theft. And that is 1, cutting off. This is the first, if you rob, this is the first time you'll get this thing. You'll have to have your right hand lopped off. Cut. If you do it again, you'll have to have your left foot cut off. If you do it a 3rd time, this breaks the Guinness Book of World Records. Just imagine a guy with no hand and with one leg trying to rob again, trying to rob something. You're put in prison for life. Now this is your Hudood laws. And the judge, it is wisdom and sagacity. If you've been a good prisoner with your one hand off and one leg off, if you've been a goody-goody, you are released from prison. Now, does this make any sense to anyone here? I doubt it. So what are we doing to repeal it? Before I conclude, and I'll just say one thing, that when you talk of the Quran per se, there are 2 or 3 principles that have got to be borne in mind. And this is where all the mischief is done, because we don't abide by it. One is a misinterpretation of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 106, which says that any ayat that we now reveal is replaced. Any ayat that we revealed before is replaced by this ayat. So what has this induced? A misinterpretation, not by the West, no, by Muslims. By Muslims jurists who say that, the ayats that forbid aggression, those have been cancelled by a subsequent ayat which say that you are allowed to fight. Now, this violates the Quranic law in totality. Why? Because the Quran has got to be read as a complete whole. Each verse, each ayat supports the other ayat. So it's got to be read in totality. Now, what is meant by this particular verse? The word ayat means a message. In the more restrictive sense, it applies to a verse of the Quran. What this verse was actually doing was referring to an earlier message, and that was the Jewish and the Christian scriptures. It was that message that was substituted by the Quran. The second principle that has got to be borne in mind, and this, by the way, is interesting because it appears only once in the entire Quran and is the key to understanding the Quran. This is in Surah Imran, verse 7. It's only in one place in the Quran it's mentioned that this is a book written in verses that are clear in by themselves, and the other part is purely allegorical. So, what is allegorical? Allegorical is, within the category of allegorical, comes everything that the Quran describes as ghaib. Ghaib is wrongly translated as unseen. Actually, it is something that is beyond human perception, that cannot be defined. The existence of God, how can you define that? Hell, how can you define that? Heaven, how can you define that? Time, concept of time, how can you define that? So what the Quran simply does is that it takes lone images. And what are these lone images? Hell is described in allegorical terms as fire where you will be, roasted, well done and all that. Heaven is described as rivers of milk and honey, so on and so forth.
Don't forget the hoods.
And of course, there's another subject, the hoods. Oh yes. That is also purely allegorical, and it sort of tries to recapitulate all the good and bad things that you face on earth, to try and picturize it for you in in the afterlife. And finally, this is as important, and I think I've just touched upon it briefly otherwise, and that is the decontextualizing of the Quran. You cannot take isolated verses and without relating it to the entire text and say that this is Islamic law. So these are some of the thoughts that I thought I should share with you, thoughts that I'm sure that you already knew about, in the sense that I have not really I have not tried to reinvent the wheel, but these are facts that I think all of us knew. But the question is, what have we done about it? What can be done? How are we to engage in a debate, change the erroneous concepts that we have about this great religion, which is based on human rights. I suppose the only thing that one can say, it is true that Islam guarantees people rights, but these rights will exist in vain for those people who do not have the courage to fight for their rights. So, with these words, I hope I have not I've tried to keep it to 15 minutes. I think I've spoken for 20. So forgive me for that.
Thank you. If you could put your hands up for any questions,
Have you any
queries,
question answer? I thought,
clarifications.
can I ask questions there also?
Of course, let's hear what they, what is on their mind, and then we can start. G.
Can you speak a bit louder, please? Yes, it has.
And is there a case since 1980 when this law was drafted, anyone has been convicted by a court of law for fornication, for this drinking and stuff?
Now, this law, what the 1961 Women Protection Act, 2006 Women Protection Act did was that it took out zina bil jabr, that is rape, as a had punishment and brought it back to the penal code. But punishments continue under the most insidious part of the Hudood laws, and that is the concept of ta'zeer. And what is the concept of ta'zeer? The concept of ta'zeer is simply that for instance, the women that have been in prison, and by the way, after this law was enacted in 2006, in that year, there were 6,500 women in prison. 80% of them were rape victims who could not prove their allegation of rape. So I hope that answers your question to some measure.
On that very positive note, we need to conclude because we have another talk following this one. Thank you so much for this engaging discussion, and we hope this series will continue, and we look forward to Uncle Ifti coming back to Kuch Khaas.
No. I'll just tell you one. Oh, by the way, just one last thing. I've done a little bit of cheating in the sense that I wanted to project this idea. I sent an article yesterday to the news about this thing. Let's see if it published. Thank you. Thank you very much.